We will begin. Just want to thank you all for joining again, my illustrious team, my dialogue team, our dialogue 3. So we're very excited to begin this new dialogue. So for everyone that is joining in, thank you so much for joining us. We're so happy to see you or to hear from you. So let me give you a very warm welcome and introduction to the dialogue. So today we are going to be advancing conversations that matter. And this particular format is the DCRC Dialogues, which offers a simple, social and structured way to participate in communication across differences while building relationships and understanding. This particular program is adapted from livingroomconversations.org. Today, our dialogue team will engage in a 90-minute dialogue. Let me make sure I don't lose power as I talk to you. But today, our team will engage in a 90-minute dialogue in which we will take turns sharing and learning from each other based on our experiences. And more importantly, we'll be reflecting on Martin Luther King Jr.'s speech, The Other America. And we'll be doing that as we discuss our different points of view as it relates to race and ethnicity. We will create brave spaces to normalize conversations about race, connect, heal, and inspire our workforce and our community at large to advance racial equality for all. So when we reflect on the conversation, and this is something really important for all the participants that are joining us today, as we move through the dialogue, we strongly encourage you to share your reflections in the chat. The chat will be fully manned and we'll be able to respond to a lot of the communications that you place there. So please, we welcome and we encourage you to utilize the chat. At the end of the dialogue, our team will open up the floor really to all of our participants to share a reflection on the conversation that you have witnessed today. So again, I want to welcome you to the conversation. So let's get to know each other a little bit. And this is a round that we refer to as why we are here. So what we will do in this round, all of our participants, we will share our name, where we're from, and what drew us here today. So any takers, anyone wants to start us off?
Yeah, I'll do it, Nigel. Thank you. My name is Donald, and I'm a first-generation immigrant, and I'm proud to say that. I came to this country in 1992, so I've been around for quite some time. I've been in the Atlanta metro for almost 24 years. What I particularly enjoy, and that's why I'm here, is to understand this whole concept of race. Because growing up, we had a whole set of different issues, and I was kind of colorblind as far as race was concerned. When I came to America, it was kind of an eye-opener for me, because I thought that I have finally reached the land of milk and honey, and suddenly I was suddenly awakened to the brute reality of race, and I'm still grappling with that, because I this is where my children have been deal with the reality, which is, and the idea we deal with it, how do that are fully seized of it, at the same time make sure that we don't knowingly or unknowingly. Anybody else?
Thank you so much, Donald.
Hi, I'll go ahead. And my name is Julia Paget. I'm the branch manager at the Roswell Library. I am from Atlanta and have lived a lot of other places other than Atlanta, but I came back to Atlanta in 2008. And now I'm actually in Decatur. And as an Atlanta native, you do know that there is a difference between Atlanta city and, everyone from Smyrna is not actually from Atlanta. Just have to say that. So now I actually live in Decatur. What drew me here is that it's an incredibly important process and a conversation that we all need to start embracing. So I'm here just because I think it's important, and I'm happy to be on this panel with these people that I've gotten to know over the past few weeks and to be able to start this process with you all.
Thank you.
I'll go. My name is Kimberly Snoddy George. I have lived in several different states, but spent the majority of my time in Northern California. And I'm a branch group administrator with the Fulton County Library System. The reason I'm here is I've been an advocate, I believe, for social justice, and this is a great forum for speaking about equity, diversity, and inclusion. And it's something that I'm passionate about and have participated in other forums similar to this. So I'm glad that we have this opportunity to do this. That's it.
Awesome. Thank you.
Hello, I'll go next. My name is Nicholas Rodriguez, branch group administrator for the Fulton County Library System. I was born in the Dominican Republic, and I came to the United States as a child. I lived in New York City and spent much of my childhood in New York and part of my adult life in Miami, Florida. And one of the reasons why I'm here is because as I was growing up, I was taught, and I believe that the dream of Martin Luther King was reached, that we were living in the dream. But then as I grew up and I saw what is really truly happening, I realized that no, the dream is still being worked on and is still being developed. So this is part of my understanding of what the dream is and how far we've gotten and how much we have to go.
Thank you.
I guess I'll go next. Good evening. I'm Victor Simmons. I am the library administrator for the Auburn Avenue Research Library on African American culture and history. And I am a product of the Bronx, New York. I've been back in Atlanta for about 5 years. I lived here prior to that, maybe 7, 8 years before that, for about 3 or 4 years. What drew me to being a part of this program is really the idea of having an open discussion about the things that we don't normally talk about, and trying to really process what we learn from that and be able to move the needle forward. So, I'm looking forward to and have enjoyed all the conversations that we've had thus far and look forward to what we end up speaking on today.
Thank you. Thank you, Victor.
Good evening. My name is Todd Williamson. I am the branch manager at the Milton Library, which I affectionately refer to as the crown jewel of the Fulton County Library System. Sorry, Julia. This is my third conversation with us, of course, and I was happy to be invited to sit on the panel. And I think I'm learning about myself as much as possible, and I'm certainly open to learning lots of new things as well too. And I think that this is an opportunity for us to share our experiences back and forth, learn from each other, and keep an open mind and an open heart with it as well too. So we talk about the head versus the heart, and sometimes I think I wear my heart on my sleeve a little bit as well too. And there's nothing wrong with that at all. So, but I'm here to learn and want to be an active participant with us. And I'm happy that I was invited to join us. So I'm looking forward to tonight's conversation as well.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, team. So I will share my name. My name is Niger Thomas, where I'm from. I am from right here in Atlanta, Georgia, Fulton County. I am a native, like Julia. I grew up, was raised pretty much in the Collier Heights community here in Atlanta. So that has a significant degree of significance for me and the Fulton County community as a whole. What drew me here today, I think what drew me here, and I've said this a little bit before, but it's a deep love and connection. I think for Fulton County is my home. So don't think about Fulton County just as an employer. I think about it as the community that raised me, grew me, taught me. And so I'm very much appreciative of that and wanting to give back, I think, in that sense. I also will share that having the name Niger really brought me into conversations about race and ethnicity very early. So from the very beginning, it's very hard to have that name without connecting to a sense of, well, what is race? What is ethnicity? So I think in many ways, my parents pretty much laid the foundation that I would be here sharing in this dialogue today. So I thank them for that now. And so that's what drew me to this conversation today. So I also wanted to open this up and give all of our participants an opportunity to share and chat what brought them here today as well. So if there's anyone there within chat that wants to share with us, please add your notations there, and we'll make sure that we speak to that and share that with the team. Marcel, please stop me if anything comes in chat so that we can also share that with everyone here. So I'll move along to the conversation agreement as we wait for that. So this is something that's very core to all the dialogues that we'll be having and the team will share with you today. The conversation agreements, again, are adapted by an organization, Living Room Organization, livingroomconversations.org. And this is very much core to how they conduct conversations and how we will engage today. So I just want to share with you, before we jump into those conversations, some language that I have been including in an introduction of all of our dialogues. And this is just simply a disclaimer that I will read fairly in a straightforward fashion. Fulton County government is an equal opportunity employer, encouraging diversity and inclusion. The videos, documentation, and other resources for this program, including this dialogue, are for educational and informational purposes only. Any views expressed therein represent the views of the speaker and or author and do not necessarily represent that of Fulton County and its employees. So now that that is done, I will open it up to my colleagues to go over the conversation agreement.
Thank you, Niger. I'm going to read the first three conversation agreements for us tonight. First one, be curious and listen to understand. Conversation is as much about listening as it is about talking. You might enjoy exploring how others' experiences have shaped their values and perspectives. Number two, show respect and suspend judgment. People tend to judge one another. Setting judgment aside opens you up to learning from others and makes them feel respected and appreciated. Try to truly listen without interruption or crosstalk. Number three, note any common ground as well as any differences. Look for areas of agreement or shared values that may arise and take an interest in the differing beliefs and opinions of others.
Okay, number four, be authentic and welcome that from others. Share what's important to you. Speak from your experience. Be considerate of others who are doing the same. 5, be purposeful and to the point. Do your best to keep your comments concise and relevant to the question you are answering. Be conscious of sharing airtime with other participants. 6, own and guide the conversation. Take responsibility for the quality of your participation and the conversation as a whole. Be proactive in getting yourself and others back on track if needed. Use an agreed upon signal like the timeout signal if you feel the agreements are not being honored.
Thank you so much. And just to review our signals for the purpose of the conversation. So in the instance where we believe that the conversation agreements are not being honored, we will use the timeout signal here. Any of the participants can use this at any time. And if time is elapsing, because this is time sensitive, we've agreed upon the kind of wrap it up. motion. So this is the agreed upon signal that we will use to guide us through our conversation today. Thank you so much. So now we will begin what we call our first round, which is getting to know each other. So the panelists in this particular round will share or will take 1 to 2 minutes to answer one of the following questions. What are your hopes and concerns for your family, community, and our country? What would your best friends say about who you are? Or what sense of purpose, mission, or duty guides you in your life? And we also definitely encourage all of our participants here to also share their responses to the questions in chat. So without further ado, I'll open it up to our group.
Hi, I'll start us off. I think tonight I'll go with what are your hopes and concerns for your family, community, and or the country. And I'll focus on, I think my hope has to be for the future, because I hope that we are paying attention to our history lessons that we continually seem to be learning over and over again. And I know tonight we're going to talk a lot about that. So my hope is that somehow we are going to learn from our history, maybe this time. And my concern is that we are in this time where we are so divisive and we're afraid to talk to each other. It's much easier to just unfriend someone or unfollow. And so my concern is that we need to get out of that habit and lean in to those sticky conversations. Because if we don't, then we're just going to continue to get more and more divided. And that's it.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Julia.
Let me take on the third question. What sense of purpose, mission, duty guides you in your life? But before that, I want to give a shout out to Allison. Allison, thank you for being here on all 3 times. It gives me, it inspires me when you have somebody following you 3 times. We know that we're doing something decent. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here. Also, hey, Allison, panelists, say a big hi to Allison. And also a big shout out to Justina and Chad. Justina and Chad, this is what I've told you a number of times. This is what I'm going to say. My sense of purpose is I'm a first generation immigrant. I'm here to stay. My purpose is basically I want to give back to this country and its people that has given me so much. And when I turned 50 a few years ago, I said, it's time I give back because I'm a grateful heart. And I decided that, at that time I told my kids, this is what I want my epitaph to say when I'm done with my life, with my worldly life. I just want to have 2 words. It says, he cared. So at the end of the day, I just want to make sure that everybody understands that my purpose in life is very clear, to be able to understand how to deal with dissent, especially in this time and age with all the strife that we see. All of us love our community. All of us love our country equally. But what is important that for us to understand that different people come to it in different ways. And so it's important for me to sit back, and something that I learned in one of the earlier discussions, which was called courageous listening. Thank you, Niger, for introducing me to that concept. When I'm doing courageous listening, it doesn't mean I'm giving up my position, but I'm understanding somebody else's position, and I'm having that silent pause to reflect. So reflective thinking happens, and I say, boy, he or she has a perspective, maybe different from mine, but guess what? They also love this community and the country as much as I. Thank you.
So proud. Thank you, Donald. Next.
Okay, I'll go next. I'd like to answer the question, what are your hopes and concerns for your family, community, and or the country? As I mentioned, I was born in the Dominican Republic, and I became a U.S. citizen back in the late 80s. And ever since then, I've seen myself and I think of myself as an American. As I've lived most of my life here in the U.S., and that is the reason why I want to focus on the hopes for my country, my new country. In the video, The Other America by Dr. King, he mentioned that he said, and I quote, "The Negro cannot solve the problem by himself." And by that, he was referring to the social issues, the tremendous issues that were happening in the 60s and that are still happening today with race and equality and all that. However, I think that the way I see it is that as in order for us to move forward and continue the dream, we have to put all the differences aside, and we have to think of ourselves as Americans. We have to be able to help each other. We have to be able to go further and just put our differences aside. I'm sure I did myself, coming from an island that is divided to this day with two different cultures. But I put all that aside, which when I left as a child, so it was not an issue to me, but I've moved beyond that. And part of the reason why I was able to do that is from being here in America and seeing how people come together and live together. But I think my hope is that we will continue moving forward, not as different groups, but as a nation. And that's one of my biggest takeaways from this video.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Nicholas.
I'll go next.
Oh, go ahead, Kimberly.
Okay, I'm going to take what would my best friend say about who I am. My best friend has actually said that she's noticed that I feel comfortable speaking with anyone. I don't typically judge people by the color of their skin. It's by their character. So she has noticed how comfortable I am having conversations with all types of people because I'm curious, and diversity is intriguing to me, differences and getting a better understanding of people. But I strive to treat everyone with respect and dignity. So that is what my best friend would say about me.
Okay, well, I'll go now. So I'll take the third one. What sense of purpose, mission, duty guides you in your life? To me, it's honesty and living with it. Not only being honest to myself, but being honest to others. One of the things that really stood out was during the speech, Dr. King had mentioned the honest confrontation with problems and a willing search for the truth and a willingness to admit the truth when we discover it. It was interesting for me because that's how I walk through life, is always trying to be as honest as possible, whether it's good or bad, whether others like it or not. What you see is what you get. I tell people all the time, I'm this way 24/7. I have zero energy to be any other way. So if that offends you, that's fine. But I'm just being true to myself, and that's what guides me through everything I do in life. So when people hear me and they hear me speak, or if I say something that makes them raise an eyebrow, I have no problems being honest, and I have no problems receiving an honest feedback to whatever I said or did. So thank you. That's it.
Thank you so much, Victor.
Thank you. I'm going to maybe do a little conglomeration of two of the questions on here, and I'm going to keep to my time frame, I promise. What would my friends say about me? They would call me introspective. Certainly I'm introverted, quiet. I tend to be a listener. So our courageous listening tends to happen with me frequently. And so it might seem like I may have tuned out, but I haven't. I'm processing what I'm hearing as well through there. And I think also some of the hopes that I have for my family, our community, are a couple things that I've tried to teach my kids, and their ages 20 to 28. So I don't have children anymore. I have young adults, and that's for them to kind of step out and be unafraid, be courageous. As we were preparing for tonight's discussion, I saw a quotation from former Attorney General Eric Holder, who was the Attorney General during President Obama. And he said that we are a nation of cowards when it comes to the topic of race. And so I thought that that was a very powerful statement. And I don't want to be a coward. We'll leave it at that.
Wow, thank you. Thank you so much, Todd. Oh, this is the problem with going at the end because everyone has like everyone has said everything that I would have or that I would aspire to say, right? Um, I hate following Todd. That was awesome. I'll tackle the first one. What are your hopes and concerns for your family, community, and our country? And I have to confess that above all things, I'm a mother first. And that's kind of an interesting thing because, you know, I aspire to do many things. I am now the director of the Department of Diversity and Civil Rights Compliance. But the thing that really matters is who I am when I come home, who I am, what kind of mother I am to my son, and what example am I setting, and what lessons am I teaching. And my son is 10. Many of you, particularly if you join in on the rest of these dialogues, you will be well aware of the story of Niger and August because it's a saga. But as he grows, he's 10. And so he's asking many questions. And this year was a very complicated year, you know, between George Floyd, between conversations about police brutality, the pandemic. And so he's really asked many hard questions about race. And the cowardice, I think that Todd references, is something that I think I struggle with as a mother. So professionally, you know, I'm all these things. But when my son, my 10-year-old son, is asking me very pointed questions, I realized that I struggled with answering him in ways that I wish I hadn't. And so a lot of my hopes and dreams are that I can be courageous with him, as courageous as I am in any other setting. But in that first role of being a mother and a teacher to him, that I can instill some sense of guidance so that his generation is further along than my generation and where we are today. So that's a little bit about me. I want to make sure that I allowed or gave some time, opportunity for anything that was happening in chat. Did anyone share anything, Marcel, that we can speak to now?
No, but one of the things that everybody can notice, Justina shared a really great book, Nonviolent Communication and Language of Life-Changing Tools for Healthy Relationships. I've actually had an opportunity, I haven't read it, but I've kind of perused it on different opportunities. So it is definitely a great book. And thanks, Justina, for sharing that.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. We need all the tools we can get for sure. Thank you so much. So now that we have gotten a sense to know each other, we've got an opportunity to hear a little bit from our participants. I want to dive into the meat, right? So this is where we spend most of our time in round 2, exploring the topic of the other America. So we'll be about 40 minutes or so within this particular round. So what we will do, I will open us up with giving us a background of the King's speech so that if anyone hasn't had the opportunity to read the speech, this is a pretty basic overview. We encourage you to, by all means, listen to that speech on the IT website. And then I'll give you an introduction to our conversation today. So I'll read fairly straightforward as it relates to the other America. And I refer to it as King's story. You know, this is really pretty much King's journey and where he finds himself as he's giving this speech. So to give you the background, King opens his 1967 speech at Stanford University. And again, he's doing this against the backdrop of the Vietnam War and the fight for fair housing. And he gives a stunning, and I refer to it as really kind of a heartbreaking vision of a fractured America. So we have this bountiful, beautiful America that is marred by this kind of disturbing and haunting other, this other that he begins to describe. So in the other America, King begins to describe the struggle for equality for the inhabitants in this other. And he discusses various individuals from various backgrounds to include, as he describes, Mexicans, Puerto Ricans, Indians, immigrants, and poor whites. And then he adds disproportionately the African American Negro, and then he begins to speak from his own perspective in that regard. So as it relates to the conversation that we're having today, we're going to really examine kind of the American ideal, what we aspire to be as we think about and reflect upon King's speech. And so our conversation introduction begins pretty straightforward as this. When the Declaration of Independence was written, not everyone was included in the famous statement about the pursuit of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And while the aspirations expressed in our founding documents resonates for some more than others, there are many views regarding the degree to which we have advanced these aspirations for everyone. Some focus more on the great strides we have made. Others point to how far we still need to go. Some believe that focusing on the past prevents forward progression. Others think we still need to come to terms with our history. So those are the two ideologies that we will balance today during our conversation. The King speech and thinking about the American ideal is such a loaded topic. So that was a very brief overview, but I just want to make sure I turn this over to my panelists, my co-dialogue team members here, to add in anything that they wanted to share before we kind of jump into the dialogue. I did this perfectly. There's nothing to add.
You did do it perfectly, but I will underscore for the people that are here participating and watching us to please do go watch the video. It's about maybe 30 to 40 minutes long. But as we have all discussed, there is a lot of, there's so much in that speech that I think it's really, really important for anyone that's interested in having these kind of dialogues and talking about race and our diversity. I really think that this is essential viewing for anyone that's interested. So please I encourage everyone on here to watch the video. So, and other than that, you said that, Niger, so still perfect, but I'm just underscoring the point.
Yeah, and Julia, while I agree with that, when I started watching the video, I had goosebumps because this was said something in the 60s. It's so relevant today. I had to go back a number of times because there's nuggets and nuggets of wisdom. And I said he even actually thought about all the different, races, including the Appalachian whites, where he talks. So it's not that he just talked about the American Negro, but he talked about the Indian, the Puerto Rican. So it's much bigger than just what I would imagine it to be. Yeah, I mean, that's mind-blowing.
Yeah,
I agree. And I was surprised that I hadn't seen this ever before. And why? Why hasn't this video been shown as much as the other? I think it's just as important, and it's so relevant now. So I was like, well, why is it? That was my question. Why haven't I seen this before? Why haven't, I had this experience of him having this speech at Stanford. So I highly recommend everyone watch it.
Thank you.
I want to throw my 2 cents in real fast as well, too. After watching the video probably 3 times now over the course of the last week or so, and I was trying to remember when I first came across the speech, and I cannot remember as well. So I don't know. I may have heard excerpts of it here and there or read part of a transcript before, but I don't think I've ever heard the full, 40-minute speech. And am I shocked? No, I'm not really. Growing up, I didn't know the story of Emmett Till. Emmett Till.
Yeah.
I didn't know the story of Claudette Colvin as well. So I'm not shocked that people might not know this speech it's a shame that we don't know it.
Yeah. This was my first, I think, in the researching of pulling together the dialogues. I think I shared with you all before. I was much more familiar with I Have a Dream, but not as familiar with what happens after the dream. And so this speech is very much about, and we find a king in this particular speech in many regards that is past the dream. You see a sense of exhaustion. And in many ways, I think a little uncertainty. Even though he has a plan or approach, I think he sees the weight of the responsibilities that are yet to come as it relates to advancing social justice. So do we have anyone else? Anyone else wanting to add in?
Well, I just wanted to say that I'm glad I was not the only one that was not familiar with this speech, and I thought, you know, maybe my history classes were not as good as I thought, but if so many others here have not, you know, people, you know, you guys were born here in this country and were here longer, have not watched the speech. I'm not the only one, but I think it should be required, at least for high school students, to watch this speech in this day and age now. We should.
Thank you, Nicholas. Anyone else? Anyone from chat? Anything from chat, Marcel?
I want to say something, even though I had my turn earlier, but I got to say this because this is a personal experience. In 1992, when I came for the first time to the United States, my whole vision of America was Hollywood and everything beautiful and everything glorious. And then I hit the streets of Detroit, and I'm walking along the streets of Detroit, and of course I see it completely run down. And this African American gentleman comes to me and says, "Can I have a quarter?" I'm wondering, you know, I've seen people panhandling in India, but I never expected it. Kind of was a rude awakening for me. I said, "You want a quarter?" I said, "I don't have a quarter with me. I just came into this country." He says, "No, you're lying to me. You speak good English." That, when in a speech, brought it home to me today when I saw the speech, and I want to quote Dr. King, which said that basically we are living in lonely islands of poverty in a vast ocean of prosperity. And to me, that kind of hit me today when I said I was thinking of that time, because I was being very judgmental at that time. In America is a land of opportunity. Why isn't this guy going and working? And that's when I realized, when I heard the speech where he says that there is a sunlight of opportunity for one America while others are looking for jobs that do not exist. Because they were, I mean, to me, that showed me that I was being so wrong in judging him, that why isn't he getting a job? He looked healthy to me. Now I realize that while there was opportunity for some in the other America, but in this America, those jobs didn't exist for him. To me, that was an eye-opener, and I said, now I understood why one should not be judgmental when you see people, you know, having issues on the road, and you say, why can't he work? Why can't he do this? Do those jobs really exist for him? Can he really get upwards? Is he going to be sharing in that sunlight or opportunity, or is he going to be relegated to the loneliness of poverty? That's what I want to say.
Thank you. That resonates very much with the equal opportunity provisions, at least for DCRC. Those are one of the core programmatic functions that ties to a lot of this, a lot of the legislation that King moves on to talk about in that speech, really founded the existence of the Office of Diversity and Civil Rights Compliance. So there's a significant legislative history that's tied to a lot of what King is saying. But thank you so much for bringing that home to us, Donald. Was there anyone in chat, Marcel? Was there anything that we needed to speak to in chat before we move into dialogue?
No, but I did put the link for today's dialogue and King's speech in the chat.
Awesome. Definitely, as Julia was saying, if you have not, please review that speech. You'll definitely probably want to see it more than one time because it is so rich. But please definitely take a look at that. Okay, so without further ado, we will dive into dialogue. So each of us will take 2 minutes each to answer one of the questions below without interruption or crosstalk. After everyone has answered, the group may take a few minutes for clarifying or following up on questions and responses. We can continue exploring additional questions as time allows. So I will open up to the group, and anyone can start and select the question that they want to respond to.
Well, I guess I'll start. I want to answer the what role, if any, do you experience our history playing in America today? It was strange because I know King in the speech he mentioned about time not being as important, as people make it out to be. He talked about, in 200 years or so, the African American will be in a better place. All we have to do is kind of wait it out and everything will work itself out. And I was just thinking about, working at the Auburn Avenue Research Library and thinking about people asking for articles from, say, like The Crisis in 1920 something, and reading some of those articles in The Crisis, and then listening to him speak in 1960, what was this, 67, and then knowing and seeing what we see today. There's so very little difference in what was happening in the African American community as well as in America, in any of those times. So, when I think about history and how it plays a part, it gives us I think it gives us a better idea of just how small certain big events have effects, the effects that they have on our everyday. While I am thankful for everything that Dr. King and the Civil Rights Movement and the NAACP have done, those changes are so small, and that kind of goes into the idea of laws being needed to kind of correct those problems. So, to me, the history is key because it really does let you see that idea of time and, how it all works itself out. We want it to happen now. It doesn't necessarily work like that for us.
Thank you. I'm fighting the urge to instantly follow up with you, so I make notes.
Well, I'm going to not fight that urge. No, I'm kidding. I'm going to jump right in because Victor answered the same thing that I really want to talk about, really, is just, as we've discussed, I have this emphatic belief that we are not learning from our history. And the history is there for us to learn from it. And I think on some level, it has to be a failure of maybe the education system, but I think it's all of our own failures that we're not emphasizing this. The fact that we didn't learn the other America speech. Why are we only focusing on the dream speech, the positive, the one that gives you the soaring spirit, and makes you like emphatically, it's a wonderful speech. Obviously, we do focus on that, but the other America is just as important. And I guess maybe the short answer to my question is the role that history is playing in America today is the fact that we are not learning our lesson, and it's either because we've not been taught it effectively or we're not paying attention. And I think we are a product of our past. And I think what we see playing out today is a product of that past and the fact that we've not learned our lesson. So to me, it's emphatic that we have to focus on history. And I'm fairly certain, and I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that after World War II, Germany made an effort to teach about Nazi Germany to all of their students because they did not want to repeat the mistake that had happened. And I just hope that we can all do the same thing. We need to just embrace our history on some level. We need to acknowledge it, embrace it, and learn from it, because otherwise we're not going to move forward. There, I'm off my soapbox. I'll let somebody else go.
I'll go next. But that was good. And I do want to follow up on that because I'll take some notes, but I'm going to answer the last question, my personal commitment to creating the America I want. In the speech, Dr. King says the Negro cannot solve the problem by himself. So, and I agree. He's basically saying that we've got to come alongside each other and have these discussions. And so what I've decided, this is the second time I've had these sort of conversations. I've had conversations in my home with strangers, inviting strangers in, 12 people, to sit around and talk about backgrounds and why they believe what they believe, who told them what, about other people, and where their beliefs and ideologies have come from. So my commitment is to continue this, to have these sort of dialogues and share with others and invite others to have these conversations, because I think that's the only way, one of the ways that we can address what Julia was saying. And I think it's fear and guilt, as Dr. King also brought up in his speech. So that's basically my commitment in helping to create the America that I want. I'm one of these people that always optimistic. So in order for me to, use that optimism, that's what my commitment will be.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay. Can I go next? I'd like to answer the question, what role, if any, do you experience our history playing in America today? During the speech, Dr. King mentioned that as we were expanding west, the land was granted to Americans. However, land was not granted to African Americans. And then I thought, well, because I've heard about the 40 acres in a mule in our history, especially here in Georgia. So I thought, well, how about that? And in discussion with the panelists, we looked into that, and we learned that even that was not the case. There was no land granted to African Americans as we expanded west, and there was no land granted to African Americans here in Georgia and in the South. And I thought, what a difference that would have made if African Americans were allowed or allotted to lands by the federal government and by the state governments, because after all, this is a country of commerce. This is a country of business. Land ownership meant a lot then, and it means a lot today. And I think it was extremely unfair. And I won't call it anything more than that, but it was extremely unfair not to grant African Americans that privilege. And I think it would have made a tremendous difference in where things are today in terms of African Americans and people of color.
I'm fighting the urge to follow up with you now. There's just rich conversation. I've made my notes. I'm making fastidious notes. Next.
So one of the parts of the speech, and I have a copy of the transcript here because I was trying to remember where it was in the speech, and it's about the 4-minute mark. And Dr. King says, in a sense, the greatest tragedy of this other America is what it does to little children. And that really spoke to me. And I was trying to figure out, has that changed? And I don't think it has. And certainly, we look at the questions that we talked about, and what can we do? What's a commitment that you could make? What is, what role do you have with that as well too? And I don't know if I have an answer right now. So, it's hard to think about that. I think our communities try to help children, but are we doing enough for them? So we see that there's always a school supply drive in the fall, We hear of, extra, food drives during the holiday season. But do we just focus on those calendar things to meet that demand? And clearly that's not enough for us. So I don't really have an answer with it right now because I'm still thinking about it. My oldest daughter did an internship in Athens when she was in school with the poor communities over there and dealing with food preparation for them. So they had food that was donated from restaurants that was going to be thrown away that they could manage. They could make meals, share those meals through the community. That's certainly one small step that community does. And other communities do it as well too. And I'm glad that she took that step to do that. She was looking for an internship and she found that, and she thought, I can do this. This makes an impact in my community. So that one simple, small step is all it takes. And clearly, she worked for them for, I don't know, it was 8 or 10 weeks. I can't remember the time frame. Another student picked it up after that. And it's more than one student doing it. So there's multiple students that are doing that. And they still deal with, food insecurity for students that are over there as well, too. It's not just little children in the communities. There are students over there. There are adults over there that are in college, that are in classes over there, who are hungry, who go to bed hungry, who wake up hungry. So there's got to be something more that we can do, and clearly there are initial steps for us to do that. And I think this speech challenges us to make those steps and make that determination. Maybe that's why we don't talk about it, because we have to look back and say, maybe we failed, and we don't want to be a failure.
That's just so rich. I want to follow up, but I'm sticking to the rules of no crosstalk until everybody has had an opportunity. It's tough. I want to follow up with you all. Has everyone gone? Because I just want to make sure.
Well, I'm going to answer this question. I'm not gone yet, so thanks, Niger. But while I answer the last question, my personal commitments to creating the America you want, when I do that, I will address all of the other questions because it isn't my answer, but I'll keep to my time limits. But essentially, my personal commitment has always been and will be to leave this place a better place than I found it. But what I understood very clearly that, our Constitution guarantees the pursuit of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. I, as an individual, can also be instrumental in helping, just as Dr. Martin Luther King said, it is not one individual, it's not the American Negro who can handle it himself, but you need it takes a village, so to speak. So my job has been, over the years, I believe that I've been blessed with a good education. I've been blessed with an ability to mentor. So I've been doing a lot of mentorship, particularly for at-risk children, and actually worked with Dr. Martin Luther King Center for Social Justice, where I said technology is my big thing. And I believe that we can use technology to educate at-risk kids, because there's a lot of children of minority who have no exposure, no experience, which people of my race has plenty of, that we can partake, and then through this education they can aspire to what Dr. King said, because they constantly struggle for decency. So I want to be there to help them to get out that struggle of decency, to give them an ability to live beyond what they imagined that they could do. I want to make sure that I can help them to work towards removing the clouds of inferiority. To me, that's a big eye-opener, because I did see that people have all kinds of stigmas in their life that never existed for me, because when I hit my garage door, I said, we live in a perfect world, until I went to public school and started mentoring kids. Now, some of the questions in terms of history, what is history? We are part of history. We create history. We, as a community, you, me, and all of us create that history that we want, which means that we understand that the Founding Fathers had written to us a good document, We want to take that and see how can we change that for other folks. What can we do to make it better? I want to give a big shout out to Fulton County government for even encouraging this dialogue. I've not seen this anywhere. That's mind blowing. I like to really thank Mr. Dick Anderson and Anna Roach and all the folks that have actually said, hey, go ahead and get it done. This is a bold move because a lot of people are worried, where's it going to go? So I want to give a big shout to the local community. I spent some time with the city of Lilburn and co-founded a program that said small town, big world. Because I realized that people have the same aspirations, come to it from different angles, but there's a lot of ignorance in when they deal with the HR. So when we opened up this festival, and initially we got probably 200 people. By the fourth year, we had 4,000 people who were sharing food, who were sharing cultural expose, and they realized that each of them, they may belong to different race, different ethnicity, but they all have the aspiration of the American dream. And finally, I want to summarize, I want to get rid of the hyphenated Americans. We are all Americans, full-blown Americans. Nobody is German American, African, in my view. Everybody's American, everybody has the same rights. Everybody has been created equal in the eyes of God and given the same opportunity in the eyes of our Constitution. But obviously, as Dr. King said, we got to work towards helping people to get out of those what I call as lonely islands of poverty and giving them the buoyancy of hope so that way they can discover the sunlight of opportunity that everybody has. That's what I believe in. And I passionately believe in it, that I want to do that. And something that I've been working on for a long time is the prevention of human trafficking, which I believe is modern day slavery. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people across the race who are affected by this. This is a big issue that particularly affects the city of Atlanta. And I've been doing quite a bit of work with local faith leadership, with local community leaders. And I believe it takes one person to make a change, and that one person can get more communities involved. And suddenly we say we have a better place that we can live in, that we can all call home.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Donald. I guess I'll take this opportunity then to follow you, Donald. And I think I'll answer the question of what role, if any, do you experience our history playing in America today? And so I struggled with these questions, admittedly. And what I decided to do was just kind of think back to when I have experienced our history playing out today. And I thought about a time, this was a few years ago. I had accompanied my cousin to a home game at my alma mater, where I went to college. And there were rival teams playing, and we had gone to the home game to witness the game. So I attended the University of Georgia. He attended Auburn. So anybody who follows SEC, I'm not a football person, but I love homecoming, right? So I went, and it was being played at Georgia. So we went there. He went to Auburn. I went to Georgia. Georgia lost. Okay. So this was at the end of the game, and we decided to go to, I don't know, for anyone who may be familiar with the University of Georgia, across from the campus, there's a downtown area. So you have like tons of restaurants, bars. It's kind of just a place where people hang out, where I hung out when I was a student there. So we went to one of the local bars in the area, and we went in, totally crowded. We were kind of lucky enough to kind of get a seat at the bar so that we could order our food, order drinks, that kind of thing. So I'm sitting there, he's sitting there. It's a predominantly white audience. I would say we were probably the only two people of color. That probably noticeably you would say we were of color at the bar. And so we're sitting there, and then there's a gentleman that comes up behind us. He sees us, and he says, "Oh, there are a bunch of N-words at the bar. So, I'm not going to try to go over there and get anything." And so he walks off. So I had to say, okay, wait a minute. Did I just hear what I thought I heard? And so I look at my cousin. He looks at me, and so I immediately am about to turn around and say something, and he silenced me, and he said, don't say anything, please don't say anything. So I sit there, I don't say anything, and I look down the bar, and there's another lady there who I do not know. She's a white female, and so she looks, And she looks appalled. And so she and I like make eye contact to say, like, did you just hear what, like, did that just happen? And so the whole time I have like a flood of emotions. But I think the very first thing that I thought, and this kind of ties into King's speech, was they're still doing that today? Like, that's really something that's still happening? Like, people are really still using that word. And I think that that was my first thought. Like, we don't, like the time, the concept of time struck me as that was so long ago. Like, what, how is it possible that someone is still carrying that language? And not just the language, but carrying the notion that they don't want to associate with someone because of who they perceive them to be today. And that what King's, the notion of time and the fact that it is neutral struck me. And so listening to King's kind of say that and thinking about that experience was that shocked me, because I think I too thought that, today people don't say that. They don't do that. That's not something that's removed. That's not where we are. We don't do those kinds of things. And the other part of it to me that I connected with King's speech was the silence, because I said nothing. My cousin didn't say anything. And the person that looked, the other Caucasian female, that we both had that moment in our eyes where we connected and we knew that that wasn't right. Like I could see in her look, in my look, in our gaze, we locked. And she just felt like, oh my God, I can't believe I just heard that. I'm looking at her, she's looking at me. And no one said anything. And so the guy walks off. And what struck me about that was he wasn't angry. It wasn't kind of an angry exchange. It was just the realization that he was not going to come to a place where we were sitting because of who we were. He definitely was not going to order a drink and sit next to us. He didn't know us. He didn't know me. He didn't know anything about me other than kind of guess what I looked like. And I thought to myself, as I listened to King's speech, how unfortunate it is, I think, that we think that time solves things, because it doesn't. And how unfortunate our silence is, because that moment happened and it was not addressed. It wasn't, and not even so much of correcting. Like, I don't know what my cousin thought. He probably thought, this is not the time to get into that. I think that was probably his thinking, because he didn't want to cause a problem, so he just said, like, please don't say anything. And I think about that, even though it was a few years ago, I still think about that today, the silence that we collectively shared. Everyone who heard that said absolutely nothing, including me. And so in that moment, it's as if we permit that, we condone it. We condone that in that moment, because no one said anything. That person just said what they had to say, decided to walk off. And so as I think about the issue of history, I think that's what's important when people say things like, oh, well, that happened a long time ago, those things are over. And what happens is history is not really over, because it surprises you. Like, I'm at a home game. I'm not thinking that I'm going to have to confront, 300 years of anything. I'm just there to enjoy a game. And here I am, confronted with this history. And so I think that sense of a living history, and thinking about King's comments of the connection of time and silence, that's why giving things time doesn't correct things, because it doesn't, time passing in and of itself is neutral. So it can be used constructively or destructively. And I think that in that speech, that's what I take. And as I think about my own lived experience, that was another thing of not being kind of subdued by this notion that time heals things. I think sometimes that's kind of what we think. It makes us feel good. You know, if you give things time, things will go away. It doesn't cause a ruckus. It doesn't give space, as we're learning to be able to kind of address those moments. And so between that and silence, it allows for the inequity to continue. You know, I just think about that. That moment set, and we all said nothing. We said absolutely nothing. And I don't know that I had actively thought about that until I heard King speak about it and started reflecting over kind of things that had happened in my own life and things that didn't happen that long ago. So you wouldn't think that that was anything that we were even still wrestling with in that way. So I think King, to me, what I connected with is it seems deceptively simple, but it happens in everyday life. These are the conversations that we overhear. You know, these are the things that we witness. And so what do we do about that? You know, on a very small level. So that was a missed opportunity. And I think I told you all initially as a mother, you know, I think about that for my son. And so, okay, well, what am I teaching him? What tools am I giving you if I rely on time and silence? Then you have nothing. You are me. You know, you're me sitting at the bar, thinking of the I have a dream speech and thinking that these things are over and not really even being properly prepared to respond in real time. So that, I think that was a big takeaway for me, and kind of reflecting in my own life story and kind of thinking about what King is saying. And it struck me because it was so powerful, because that was so long ago. And how is it that he's teaching me today, you know, in 2020, in 1967? You know, how is that possible? So history for me, I think is very real. And I think it happens in times when we don't expect it, because I think we do sometimes collectively believe that time heals things just magically because it passes. And then we decide at some point whether or not we're going to say anything about it or not. So that's my story. That's my story. Has everyone had an opportunity to respond? Because I want to make sure I open up to group before we do our crosstalk. Marcel, did we have anything in chat?
Yeah, so one of the things Allison said, we may have been created equal, but unfortunately we are not all given the same privileges to thrive and grow. Chad said, "Hi everyone, and thank you, Niger, for sharing your example of your experience in dealing with systemic racism. Can any of the other panelists discuss similar personal experiences with racism?"
That's a good question. I guess panel, anyone? Any
stories? Well, I've never had someone call me a nigger personally to my face, and I'm gonna say the word because I feel like when we don't say it, we keep continuing to allow it to have the power that it does. But I've witnessed it in passing. And again, I'm from New York City, and I was in Midtown Manhattan, and a white male in a business suit was crossing the street one direction. The black woman was walking in the opposite direction, and they crossed paths. And he was in a hurry, so he bumped into her. And she said, watch where you're going, And he just turned around quickly as he continued to walk and said, "F you, you nigger," And I was just like, I froze because I was just like, wait, I did the same thing you did in the sense that,
like, what?
Did you really just say that? You know what I mean? In the streets. And then I was thinking about what you said and that kind of, well, why didn't I say something in return? And I think about when you think about the fear that we all who are people of color have nowadays, especially, and we've had for years, of our children in the streets, what happens when they're stopped not only by police, but even by a mob of angry individuals. What can happen? As you mentioned, being in the bar, you were the minority. I'm surprised that when you told the story that the lady didn't say anything, because that is what tends to happen as we become, we get defensive and say, hey, is this the right time for me to act out? I'm not really in the right place to act out. And you tend to always find that there is someone who's offended, who's from the opposite race, who will defend you, for what was said. And to me, it was like hearing that and thinking like, well, what should you have done?
Right. I think my cousin, he just stopped it because I think like there was shock. I wasn't, that's not something I was expecting, obviously. And so I had that moment of like, did I just hear that? You're checking to make sure and all this other stuff. And so he saw me. And so I turned to him and I'm like, did you just hear, so he sees me and he's like automatically like, no, like don't say anything.
Right.
And I think for him, it was like almost a fear of, okay, we're outnumbered in here. So like literally, if you say anything, I'm afraid that I may not be able to handle like whatever comes out of that. So like, please don't do that. And so it was that collective fear that literally just kind of shut down any kind of response, anything to that. And I'll never forget like looking down the end of that bar and seeing the look on her face because she knew that it wasn't right, and I think she was just as surprised as I was to have heard it. And I think that when we had that look and then we broke because she looked down, like she was like, we looked, we're all kind of trying to figure it out, I guess, in those moments of how we're going to handle it, what are we going to do? And so she broke the gaze and she just looked down at the bar. And I think if I really think about that now, I think it just pretty much confirmed that we can't do this by ourselves. And so what are you really going to, like, first of all, are you going to get out of here? Because I think that was my cousin's thing. He was like, look, it's too many people in here. I don't think that we would be able to really get out of here. So please don't say anything because I don't think it's safe for you to say anything. And I think she looked and I think she probably felt like, you know what, it's probably not the best thing to do to try to address this. So I'm just going to look down and just say, that didn't happen. And I think that when she did that, it pretty much affirmed to me that there's literally not much that we can do about this.
Right. But at that moment, you needed her.
I did.
To say something.
Yeah, I needed her.
Her saying something
I needed her to
would have made you feel at least there's something good there. Like, yes, this individual was the way he was, but she knew it was wrong. And she said something in defense. You know what I mean?
That would have given me definitely a different sense. But I think at that time, you just felt alone in it. And it was a weird feeling of being alone because you saw, at least in her response, she knew that wasn't right. And it offended her. Like I could see it. Like, when you see people, because she was like, oh my God. And we both looked at each other like, oh my God. Like, did you hear that? And I think that once she said that, she kind of had that, we had that connection. But I think, and this is something that goes into a previous dialogue that we had before, where Julia, you and I were kind of connecting on that sense of a collective fear.
Right.
Out, and it transcends race, because I think that collectively, I think she was afraid too. And that sense of the courage, that it takes to really, in those moments when it matters,
right,
to be able to stand up against, someone who's saying those things and doing those things. And I think it was interesting, like I said, because he wasn't angry.
Right.
it was just such a significant level of indifference. And it was just kind of callous because, like I said, I think you can, maybe even it would have been more understandable if he had been angry. But the notion that he wasn't, and it was just like, I don't have time for that. I'm not doing, I'm not going to do that. And it was just like completely just dismissive, as if to say, I'm just not going to get into that because they're there.
Right. And I really, this underscores, and Kimberly mentioned it a little while ago, but it underscores like at the end of the King's speech when he says, I think others have referenced this, that it is going to take, it's going to take whites and blacks. And for whites, you have to get over the guilt. And for blacks, you have to get over the fear. And I think your story is a perfect example of that. There is so much fear. I mean, and sure, yeah, after maybe UGA loses to Auburn and there's maybe drunk people, maybe that's not the best time to,
right. And it was
address
scary.
it. But
there were a lot of drunk people around.
Right.
So
I mean, and I'm being sincere about that, because as a person that has confronted people when they've used that word, it can go horribly wrong. And I mean, really wrong. And so it's just, there is an element of fear. And so I've kind of learned as a woman that sometimes you don't say that to a man. Oh, there is an element of fear. You fear for your safety. You also fear for the other people around you that you think you're speaking up for. I will say that my husband is a white man, and he will confront people. He's much more likely to confront someone. I think he feels safer in that when he hears that kind of language, and he will do it at Braves games with drunk people. And I mean, the fact is that word is not dead, and it has reared its ugly head even more in our recent history. So I think your story, I just thank you so much for sharing that, because I think it underscores again how important it is for us to learn from our history and to revisit that speech, and to your point, take that action and make that it is important. She should have said something. I don't want to defend her or anything. She should have said something, but there may have been other things going on. But what we can do now is to try to always remember, because it is, I mean, thank you for sharing, because if you're in your world, it would have made a difference. Then I think that's a lesson learned for all of us, because it does make a difference, because we're not, again, to Donald's point, we should be one American, I mean, but it just doesn't feel that way.
Feel that way sometimes.
I just wanted to share a couple of things. Being a male, I obviously like to confront, but I also like to de-escalate. And I also like to inject a little humor, and I pride myself to think on my feet. I give you a situation where, Chad and I were out at lunch in downtown Atlanta, and obviously the gentleman who was not of my race came up and asked me for something, which I obviously was not obliged to give him, either money or food. So he just turned around to me and said, "I hate Indians." And so I turned to him and I said, "So do I." So he didn't know what, he asked me, "What do you mean by you hate Indians too?" I said, "I'm African-American just like you, and I hate them." So he didn't know what to say at that point, because then he realized, I said, "Do you hate us because I did not give you some food?" I said, "I would have given it to you or given you whatever you wanted, but there was no reason for you to say that you hate a particular race." And I kind of confronted him, but de-escalated, so it was not a conversation that got, ugly. Another time, I don't know whether to say it's, racism or stereotyping. This was in a suburb where, I asked a lady in perfect Queen's English. She looked at the brown face at me and says, "I don't speak Spanish." And I said, "Neither do I." And that's when she realized I was speaking English. Because all she did was look at my face. She didn't care to hear what I was asking her in perfect good Queen's English. I just was asking her some directions, but she just said, "I don't speak Spanish." She assumed that Spanish came from my mouth. Another situation that I want to bring up is after 9/11 happened, there was so much of ignorance. I remember going to downtown. People thought I was from, Iraq or some part, and I would actually find people move away from me, worried that maybe I have something. It was kind of intriguing initially, and then I realized there was probably more ignorance and fear. It didn't bother me. It bothered me initially, but later on I realized it was more ignorance and fear and self-preservation. So sometimes you got to be careful, how to distinguish between ignorance, fear, and racism. And so I'm very particular. So when, Chad mentioned about, other, examples of racism, I think I've never really experienced that. I've seen people react to somebody looking different more from because I'm different, and not really experience somebody who looks different from them, and they throw in some things because of a stereotype that they might have. Literally, when I go to a car lot, they always address me as doctor because they think every Indian is a doctor. So you get the positive stereotype too.
Yeah.
So you get the positive stereotype. They think either an person of Indian race is either a software engineer or a doctor, or a motel owner, or somebody who's affluent, somebody who's educated. And it takes some amount of correction to say that we're just like any one of you. We're just trying to get ahead in life, and we're not that rich immigrant who's come here to take your job.
Thank you for sharing that, because it kind of helps me unpack the experience a little bit more, because I think what's most interesting about that night at the bar is that we clearly understood each other. Like, I knew exactly what he meant by using that language, and we had an understanding. I didn't misunderstand. I knew exactly what history he was referencing. And it's just that notion of history coming back, like where you think that's a long time ago, to King's point, but here it is again. So it's not dead in the sense that you thought it was, because like here it is again, and and it's not something that I'm planning, but I'm presented with this. And so here we go, 300 years of history of unpacking and understanding all of those different things. And I think that that's what to me was most interesting about that particular exchange, because it shows that at any given moment, you're going to be presented with 300 years worth of history. And you don't always know when that moment's going to happen. You can be at a bar, at a home game. And so here you go, you're having to address that history. And so I think that's what was so powerful about what King is speaking to in The Other America, because he's saying, don't be confused. Don't be lulled into this kind of false sense of security that, as people are saying, if you just let enough time pass, the problem will resolve itself. It's not magic. It's very intentional work. I think that was kind of, at least for me, what I get out of reflecting on King's comments, is that it doesn't happen by chance. He and the language that he uses to describe it is very intentional. I think by all means, King is very intentional in this speech. I think I said that to you all before. Like, every word, every metaphor that he's drawing is very intentional. And so you hear the terms of glorious battle. You hear these terms of kind of dedicated work that he's drawing out. And he's saying that these are the next steps in addressing kind of this, what I hear him say is this new kind of unaddressed phase and this focus on equality and not tolerance. Because integration was very much about tolerance in many ways. Like, I would tolerate you sitting at a lunch counter. Okay, I will tolerate that. I will tolerate integrated schools to a certain degree. But that doesn't really have anything to do with true, genuine equality. Those are two very, very different things. And I think that that's kind of what King was speaking to, and kind of in his, and then he was assassinated shortly thereafter. So we don't get the fulfillment of that next phase. It doesn't happen. So that was kind of what I connected with, I think, and kind of reflecting on what King is saying, and then kind of reflecting on these kind of the living room conversations format of how do we see history playing out, like in today, like right now in your day-to-day life. How do you see that operating and playing out?
Nigel, you bring up a good point. He did say time becomes an ally of social stagnation. Mm-hmm. And when you were telling your story, I was thinking about, okay, also time passes when people say things and when people pass things down through time. And that's what has happened when things aren't addressed. That's what happens in our society. We're passing things down to children, views and things. So this is what happens during that time. So that's why that's why I feel like we're back here in 1967, where that speech took place, because we've been, tolerating each other, tolerating things instead of addressing them and having the courage to have conversations to address, these issues. So,
Yeah. Yeah, a lot to unpack there for sure.
yeah, it is, and going all the way back to our first dialogue. Yes, I've been called that name when I was in the school that I was the middle school that I was the first African American female in. So I've had that happen, and it was a guy, and I figured I was going to be here for 3 more years. I might as well address it. And it was interesting in the class because I'm 12, 13 years old, and we're young, and everybody else heard it, and everybody else was like, "Whoa, only Black girl." And I was like, they heard. I was like, well, I guess I better address this with this guy. And I said, what did you mean by that? What? I was just saying the word, And so I said something because I was trying to figure out where he was coming from, why he was saying it. And, I didn't go and tell anybody. He says, he apologized, but, that was my first time being called a nigger while I was in school. So, yeah. Yeah, and this is in Santa Rosa after I left the streets of San Francisco and moved up north where there's hardly, any African-American kids, so.
Yeah. And I had grown up in Collier Heights, so I had lived somewhat in a cocoon. So that wasn't like my everyday. So I think that when I heard it, that's why I was like, wait a minute, what? Like, what is that? Like it was, it was a little surreal.
Yeah.
But, I think it kind of shows the significance of these conversations so that you can see how it plays out in real time in people's lives. So it's not some kind of theoretical construct. Like, this is literally what people experience. And even if you don't experience it directly, I think even witnessing it, because even for, the Caucasian woman where we connected, that was still an experience for her too. And it's because she's grappling with that, because she knows, I've got a problem with that, but I don't really know how to address that. And she and I in that moment were the same. We were on different sides of that situation, but we didn't necessarily know how to handle that. Like, well, what is the right thing to say? And then it's all happening so fast. And like most things in life, it's not planned. It's something that happened, and then you're trying to kind of deal with that in real time. And so it's messy. It's not, it's not structured like what we're doing right here, So those, I think that was the importance of King's speech, the importance of us being able to connect and share, and so that we learn more about lived experience. And I think that even Todd's comments about what happens with children, like, well, what does that do? What is the impact for them? And I think King speaks to that when he talks about that sense of nobodiness. And you'll hear the theme of that come up in a lot of his other speeches. And he talks about the sense of having to struggle with that sense of feeling less than because of color. And to me, that transcends race, because the color issue in America is not necessarily a race issue. It's not just kind of a Black issue. It's anyone that happens to be brown. basically. You're going to be confronted with having to deal with this issue of color. And so I think that he talks about that expansively from the perspective of trying to instill a sense of somebodyness, to Todd's point, to ensure that we have something that kind of counteracts that, so that you do have a sense of self and that you do have a sense of self-pride and self-love.
Nigeria, I want to share something. And, for me, this is a powerful time in history as far as I'm concerned, this dialogue that we're having. Because for most of you, except yourself, I didn't even know any of them on the panel, but we belong to different ethnicities. We belong to different races, and yet we're able to sit together, talk together like human beings, basically trying to merge the two Americas into one America, which Dr. King's dream was. And I think to me, that's a powerful statement that if communities want to get together and sit together and dialogue, they don't need to be polarized. And we can do this in our community. And this is what we saw in one of our earlier, we talked about Dr. Kemp and her methodology, which is essentially that we are willing to sit together, different ethnicities, different groups, and we're able to have these bold and frank discussions without sweeping this whole race issue under the rug anymore. For too long have we done that. And I'm proud to be part of this panel where, except for you, I didn't know the others, but yet I was able to, without fear, share, and I'm sure the same is echoing in everybody's mind, was able to share that we all have the same aspirations and dreams. We come to this with different perspectives, from different ethnicities, different race, different professions. And yet we all want the same thing. We want a better America. We want a better today for us and for everyone. And that is Dr. King's dream of merging the two Americas into one America. So to me, that's a big moment in history by itself. If every community takes this on to themselves, imagine what a beautiful place America would be.
Nigel, continuing my thoughts on the children aspect of it, and I wondered, as I sit here with my clean bottle of water, what Dr. King would think about what's happened in Flint for the last 4 or 5 years. We have water that people can't drink. And he talks later on in the speech, about 25 minutes into the speech, about our cities confronting huge problems in powder kegs. Clearly that water issue in Flint is still there. It hasn't gone away. We don't talk about it in the newspaper. We don't see the story anymore, but we know that those families, those children, are still drinking. Hopefully they're not drinking this water, but we know that, it's lead infested water that I don't understand why there hasn't been a solution to it yet. And I wonder what it's going to take to fix it. Who is it going to take? It's not one person that can fix it. And clearly, the community of Flint itself can't fix it by themselves. I don't know what it is, and it's heartbreaking.
Yeah, I can remember that.
That won't happen in Johns Creek, Georgia. That's not going to happen in Suwanee, Georgia. So, and I don't know, and we have lots of questions, and we don't have solutions. And I don't have an answer for it either. But as I drink my clean water, I don't think about it though either, which is a tragedy in itself.
That's so powerful, Todd. I think you've hit on so many important things, and I think part of it is just the acknowledgement that there are inequities there. And I think that sometimes that seems like a small thing, but it's not. Because I think that it really does, it takes as a first step the acknowledgement that people have some things and other people don't. And I think you saying that is a big step, acknowledging that. And I think that's what King is really drawing out. Not in the sense of America and the other America. It's not forcing us to choose, that there is just one. Because I think in King's speech, we realized that there are these multiple experiences, so that yes, America is all of these beautiful and bountiful things for some. Okay, so he doesn't ask you to choose. And I think that's what's really powerful about what King does in this speech, because you don't get into the false argument of which America is right or wrong. So you don't go down that road. He's not putting you down that road. He's saying, yeah, they're both here. And let me show you what they look like.
Yeah, he ends his speech with, it can be a beautiful symphony.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have a symphony if it's just woodwinds playing.
Yeah, I think, as we said before, he's very masterful at getting rid of a false argument. I think that whole speech, I think Victor even said something to that, of how structured and how intentional he was about discounting the false argument as much as possible. He deals with the issue of time. He deals with the issue of silence. He just moves those off the table. So you're no longer even going down that road in the argument. It's not even about it anymore. So I think he's very good at kind of dismissing that and really pulling out these two realities. It does have to be one because it is two, and it depends on kind of what your experience is. And it's a collective experience because he's drawing what I took out of it, that kind of bigger picture. Because the Flint situation didn't just happen to people of color, it also happened to poor white communities that King began to kind of draw out. He's beginning to kind of move in that direction with the Poor People's Campaign and some other things that weren't able to be fully realized because he was assassinated. But you kind of see, I think, in this speech, the blueprint of what would have come next, perhaps. Had he not been assassinated and things kind of move in a different direction based on that. I am cognizant of the time. I hate to say that because this conversation has been so rich, but we're at the 7:38 marker. We actually went 8 minutes over. So I wanted to make sure I open up for the participants here to share any of their reflections as well. So I will move us from here to the reflection round so we can allow for that. Does that sound good for the panel?
Sure. Nigel, can I mention something that Donald had said that really struck with me? He was mentioning about coming to the country with the idea that why couldn't this guy get himself out of that situation? And I thought about King talking about having the conversation with the white man about why can't blacks pull themselves up by the bootstraps? And he had said, imagine asking that to someone who has no boots, and it made me think of, there was a conference for African American librarians that had come to Atlanta, and they happened to be at the Auburn Avenue Research Library for one of the events, and I had spoken. When I got off the stage, there was a young lady who came over to me and asked me, "Oh, what part of the Bronx was I from?" And I told her where I was from, and her eyes got really wide because she was just like, "I grew up right across the street from you. We didn't know each other, but we both grew up in New York City Housing Authority, also known as the projects, and she is the director of the Tulsa City Public Library System."
Wow.
And the first thing she said to me, and it kind of made me think, because I'm like, I went to school, I did all of these things. Technically, you could say, oh, I picked myself up by the bootstraps, right? But, and so did she. But then the first thing she said was, she met another individual who also grew up in the same neighborhood as us, who was also running another library system. And the thing that she said to her was, you made it out too. Wow. So the idea of pulling oneself up by the bootstraps is never really on my mind, because I realize that it in so many ways, even though there's three individuals who are successful and well-educated and so on and so forth, we all realize that it was luck. Coming from where we come from, that it was luck, that we were the few that got lucky enough to go to school, to have family that would help and do these certain things and to push us in a direction. Because if we didn't have that, we'd be stuck. We'd be still technically a part of the other America and never being a part of the idea that Donald came to the country with. So it was something to think about. The first thing that she said to her was, "You made it out too," as if you were in a prison,
That is so powerful. Like, man, I wish we could give that the treatment that it deserves, because now that you say that, reflecting on kind of what Donald shares, something else that stuck with me about the King quote about the kind of pulling yourself up from the bootstrap, and it was the sense of there are kind of two narratives, the one where you make it in spite of who you are or because of who you are. And in the ideal America, I would want people to make it because of who they are, not despite all of these kind of systemic matters that would naturally just inhibit your ability to grow, right? So we should all be making it because of all of the things that we have in play, not despite. And I don't, as much as the American narrative is very much, I think in many ways about kind of the overcoming and kind of fighting against the tyranny or oppression and kind of all these things from different perspectives. But at the end of the day, when we think about the America that we want to be, I think that's part of it too, this notion of not feeling like you're making it despite all of these things, but we're addressing the barriers that create this notion that you're having to make it, in spite of, right? Beyond that. And so I think that kind of speaks to a lot of what Todd was sharing too, these realities. And I think the Flint example is a good one, where you're looking at individuals that are having to make it despite, not because of the structure that we put in place to help support, but despite the barrier that they have to health and safety that they're making it. So that, man, I almost feel like we need another dialogue on that.
To double down, the security guard at Auburn Avenue Research Library, we found out she also grew up across the street from me.
Are you serious?
We knew all the same people, but we didn't know each other. And
wow.
After having the conversation, the next day she pulled me to the side, and the first thing she said out of her mouth was, "Mr. Simmons, I am really proud of you." And I was just like, it really hit me, because I was like, wow. But knowing where we come from, that goes back to the idea of it really is luck. You know what I mean? Though I put in the effort, it was really luck, because I knew plenty of intelligent, individuals from my area, my neighborhood that I grew up with who were not lucky, and didn't get the opportunities because of different things that were in that area, in that community, that were always working against them.
Victor, I'd like to say something. When effort meets opportunity, that's called luck. When effort meets opportunity, which is why I constantly, because I participated a number of times in the White House Conference for Small Businesses. And one of the challenges I've always had is, and this is what perplexed me, but now I see it more, that what Dr. King talks about, the inferiority. I've noticed that many times a number of African-American male do not participate in the process. For example, in the White House business for White House Conference for Small Businesses, you find a lot of people of other ethnicities, including white folks, but very rarely you would find African-American people trying to take advantage of some of those opportunities. I was initially judgmental, and then I realized some of them were a little afraid to be there, because they were afraid that do they have the same level of skills to participate in those conferences. I also did a lot of work with historically Black colleges and universities, and also participated in the White House Conference. I saw there was a lot more participation there from educators, and there were some wonderful African-American educators. I only wish in the other professions there were sufficient representation from other minorities to help them to leverage that opportunity. But in my mind, effort is a big thing. Opportunity needs to be grabbed, but then all of us together have to help to give that person a little push up or a little leg up. Because at the end of the day, they have what Dr. King mentioned about some fears, some inferiorities, and that prevents them from grabbing that opportunity and making good. And to me, that's important that all of us get out there to reach out and give a helping hand.
Thank you. I wish we need another dialogue. We might have to add on.
You know, we say this every week. We're going to end up with like a 13-part series because every week we're like, we need to add another dialogue.
We need to add another dialogue. But the structured time is important. So I want to make sure that I can move us to the next round because we're running about 5 minutes kind of past our time within the dialogue. So very quickly, I just wanted to reach back out to Marcel to make sure that we don't miss anything and comment before we move.
There are a lot. Yeah, there are actually a lot of comments.
Oh, good. We can. I definitely want to make sure that we can speak to kind of everything happening in chat right now.
I'm gonna scroll up a little, and I'm gonna kind of be a little brief. One of the things that Justina mentioned, she said, before coming to this country, I did not know that word was offensive. I heard that word a lot in different songs, thinking it was just a word. I had to educate myself. Glad I did. It was my ignorance.
Oh, that's very powerful. Yeah. Thank you for sharing, Justina.
One of the stories that Allison shared, she said about 15 years ago, I was in the Chattanooga area on my way to an event. Due to some road construction, the directions were not correct, and the cell service at the event site was very shoddy. I came to somewhat of a cul-de-sac, dead end, where other cars going elsewhere had to turn around, and there happened to be a local man standing outside his property. I asked him if he knew where the Kiwanis camp was. He asked if that was the end camp. I immediately was offended and fearful, and I was in the middle of rural nowhere and stumbled over the words that I didn't know about or what was about to happen. In retrospect, I could have done more, but I was a woman by myself. She goes into then saying, to compare it to something I know, the swastika started out as a symbol of divinity and spirituality, of good luck and well-being. Hitler tainted that symbol, and it will probably be centuries before we can claim it back. Similar, the N-word had loads of baggage, and perhaps it can be unloaded, but it will take lots of time.
Yeah, I don't, that's just such a very loaded word, and I think it's because of the history that's associated with it. And so even though it has carried some different variations and it's not universally accepted, even if you kind of hear colloquially these kind of different terms, what it's been meant to, I guess, transcend to in meaning, it doesn't hold true for everyone. And I think a lot of it is circumstance based, because clearly in the scenario and the experience I lived, he was not talking about kind of whatever the colloquial term was, that it's kind of transcended into. He had a very specific meaning, and it wasn't that. And I think we know that. That's kind of one of those instinctive things where I knew exactly what he was talking about, and I related to exactly what he was saying. I knew what he was saying. We understood each other, but it was a negative exchange. So I can connect with that experience for sure because of the uncertainty. It's offensive. You're afraid because you're not really quite sure how to handle that. But I think what it really shows too is that we just don't want that. We don't want to have those kinds of experiences. So thank you for sharing that with us.
Yeah, I just want to mention about the swastika because that's it's kind of Eurasian. Mm-hmm. It's a Hindu tradition, and that got reversed. Mm-hmm. But actually, it has a deep meaning of divinity and spirituality, which unfortunately got tainted, as Alison rightly said, by the swastika. Yeah. And sometimes it's kind of interesting because a lot of devout Hindus would actually draw that symbol outside. It's called a swastika. And Jewish neighbors get a little worried. They said, am I living next to somebody who's a Nazi sympathizer? And it takes a little bit of understanding or explaining that this is something that was 5,000 years old, that was kind of desecrated and made a symbol of hate when actually it was a symbol of love. It was a symbol of divinity.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Thank you, Donald.
Mm-hmm.
Anything in chat? Any other comments in chat, Marcel?
No, it was just, and then after that, it's a lot of kind of back and forth with other members just talking. But those were two of the ones that I definitely wanted to point out. Allison and Justina's comments, which I thought were really good.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. We went a little over. So I'll quickly kind of move us to the reflection round. I'll maybe give us maybe 10 minutes versus the 20 since we ran a little bit over in the dialogue. So I think what I'll do for sake of time, I'll open up to panel, and then I definitely want our participants to continue in chat to kind of reflect on the conversation. So I think instead of 2 minutes, we'll just take one to reflect on and respond to one of the questions that we have here before us. As it relates to kind of what we learned and kind of what we take away from this particular dialogue. So I'll open up to the group, and for our participants, definitely opening you up to chat.
Nigel, I'll be a little brief here, and I'll try to save us a couple seconds for all of us as a whole. And we've talked about this now for 3 weeks, about talking about our experiences. And speak from your experiences. And hearing your story tonight, and Allison's in the chat, and Kimberly's story as well. Those experiences that I believe could be our most important textbook that we have. So we can listen to a speech, we can go back in time and read what we need, but when we hear and we discuss these experiences, that becomes that important textbook that we have. And it's probably easier to remember our history when we're living through it as well too. So I'm gonna stop there. So I think that's what I brought tonight, and what's been meaningful to me tonight, thinking about that and moving forward.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Todd.
Hello. Yes. The question, what was my most meaningful, valuable to me in this conversation, was the fact that when Dr. King addressed in the beginning of the speech, he addressed everyone, African Americans, Mexicans, Puerto Rican, Indians, and also poor white Appalachians. But what strikes me is that although I was not able to share some experiences, I've had some experiences where I was not called the N-word, or I was not called a Hispanic or Latino, but I was called other things, for being brown. So that is for me very important, because Martin Luther King did address all of us, and it's a general, open call to everyone that may be a minority, or maybe unprivileged or underserved for any reason.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, because it's definitely, it transcends race. I think that was the thing that was really compelling to me about King's speech, is that we might all have our own stories, but the experience of being brown, and he talks about color. And we talked about that in some of the earlier dialogues, where you see that transcendence from race, and it really is kind of the story of just being brown, just being brown. So thank you, Nicholas. That is definitely important to note.
I'll just quickly say that the next step that I'd like to take personally, based on our conversation tonight, is to just not be afraid, and when you hear something like that, you say something. And it's a simple concept, but boy, it takes a whole lot to actually do it and live it and walk it. Regardless of if they're drunk people in a UGA bar, sometimes you just have to pick your moments and maybe I'll harness some of what Donald does and de-escalate, but it still needs to be said, because the person out there is listening.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much.
There's something I'd like to talk about, the next steps. While I'm always like to go forward, but I want to take a moment to pause. Too often, especially in current times, I've seen that we want to deny our history. I was particularly grieving when I saw all those statues being toppled for no rhyme or reason, to the extent that a statue of Gandhi, an apostle of peace, was toppled in London because somebody said, he symbolized hatred. So this actually happened in London. So the question that I always say is, in order for us to have a better tomorrow, it is important for us to understand the yesterday. It is important for us not to deny history, good and bad. Like, for example, the Holocaust, never again. But the Jewish people will always remember the Holocaust, make sure that never happens ever again. So they don't deny that part of history. They don't want to wipe it away. They don't want to say that, it never happened. And unfortunately, I see in modern day America, we want to quickly, deny history, knock those statues down, bring them down, the symbol of hatred, because we basically want to have what I call as, almost like an amnesia. That part never existed. We were a perfect world. But it's important for me as a next step that I got to go out and help people in the pursuit of happiness, in the pursuit of liberty, life, and in the pursuit of happiness. But to do that, I need to know the history. I need to understand the sacrifices, the suffering that people of color have made, and the poor white folks have also made. There were a number of white folks also joined in the Selma March. One never has to forget that. So it was not that it was clear that only black folks participated in the civil unrest, but there were white folks, there were black folks, there were Hispanics too. So it's important for us, while we move forward and march forward, never to forget those sacrifices that a lot of people happen, never to deny history. So for me, the next steps are very clear. What can I do to use my skills, God-given talent, to help somebody else in the pursuit of happiness? For me, that's an important thing. How do I do that? How do I get out of my comfort zone? And get out and help what I call is the at-risk or less fortunate, taking from Todd for the young people. The young people are our future. Can I do something for the young people so that way they have a better tomorrow based on my experiences, so that they don't have to go through some of the horrible past that some of us have encountered?
Thank you.
I'm going to piggyback on what Donald said, because I think you kind of almost read my notes. We have that in common when it comes to a digital divide. What can we do to shrink that digital literacy? And I was like really excited when I heard you say that, Donald. I said, wow, we've got that same common topic. What can we do to help younger children for the future? So that was my new learning and understanding that I got from Donald, that I did not know. So I thought that was great that you're participating in those efforts.
Thank you, Kimberly.
I'm sorry. What I would say is, what was the most meaningful and valuable to me with this conversation was the fact that we were having the conversation. Thinking about the prior discussion with Dr. Kemp, and how to really have an open discussion. Thinking about Dr. King having that discussion with the man about the bootstrap, and having that open and honest discussion. And then for all of us to sit here today and share, and and I was thinking, even the littlest things that make you think about certain things, as we talked about, Nicholas sharing, that he's had, instances where he was called things. And this is an open discussion. And if Todd or Julia had shared something about, a person of color, calling them a name, it'd be understandable, and say, okay, I'm sure it might have happened, because we are not exempt from from being, racist ourselves. I mean, again, we're American, and if we have that sort of separation that we do have, you are destined to find plenty, as Donald shared with the African American man being racist towards him. So it's the fact that we can have a discussion to share instances about our experiences in life is the most valuable thing to me.
Yeah, that was awesome and so true. I want to I just want to highlight that it doesn't, these experiences don't just belong to one group. So even though King is expressing it, definitely, I think he did it probably more eloquently than I've heard it. because he just talked from his perspective, but he was a little more inclusive, I think, in the American experience across all races. And so it's not just kind of a monolithic thing where it's only the African American experience that's at issue. You know, it is really a whole total story of multiple experiences taking place across race and ethnicity. So that is important. I definitely don't want that to get missed. So thank you for highlighting that, Nicholas and Victor, because that's an important point. Reflections group? Next. Anyone left? Was that everyone? Okay. So Marcel, I guess we'll open it up to our participants before we close out. Anything happening in chat?
No. I don't have anything in chat.
Nothing in chat? Okay.
I did put the, I did go ahead and put the, I know you're closing it out, the give us your feedback link
Yes.
in the chat though.
Excellent. We definitely want your feedback. So for everyone who has joined us today, thank you. We appreciate your participation so much. I thank everyone on our team, everyone on our panel for everything they've shared, and just how present you all have been throughout all the dialogues. So we welcome your feedback, definitely. And we also issue a challenge to everyone that's here to take the living room conversations format, and that is what you have experienced with us today, and open up these conversations, not just here with us, but also in your own homes with your family and friends. So that's a challenge that we pass on to you. We'll be gearing up for our next dialogue starting again in November after the election. So look forward for more invitations and more invites for us as we push through with our remaining dialogues. So anything else from the team before we call it a night?
I just want to say something that Allison encourages me for the last line that she says, and I want to read it, quoted Allison. So thank you for all coming together and sharing your lives with me, with us, and with each other. That's a powerful thing, Allison, because that means a lot to me, because the fact that we're spending all these hours after a long working day.
Yes.
Thank you, because that means a lot.
Most definitely. Well, thank you all so much, team, for joining us, and we look forward to the next dialogue kicking off in November.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank
Have
you.
a great night.
Thank
Everyone
you.
take care.
You too.
Stay safe out
Stay
there.
safe.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Nudger. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.